Hello, welcome to the Intrigue podcast, where we approach various ideas from across the world, from across time, from a curious, intrigued, and excited standpoint. My name is Ler Jawar. This is the first episode of a three-episode series in which we will be exploring Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method of evaluating and treating pathologies as seen as originating from conflicts in the psyche through dialogue between the patient and psychoanalyst, and the distinctive theory of mind and human agency derived from it. This particular episode will be an exploration of Sigmund Freud's dream theory. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, in dream theory, Freud seeks to establish a psychological technique in the interpretation of the dream and use the very application of this method in showing dreams to be senseful psychological structures that have a place in the psychic activity of the wakeful stage. Now, Freud seeks to understand that this relationship between the dream and Freud seeks to understand the relationship between the dream and the wakeful state, and in doing so seek out some fundamental cause or source of the dream. And the first source he identifies is inaccessible memory. Recollections almost completely ignored, not just recollections, but even impressions in daily life. These impressions almost completely ignored by the conscious mind, but are wholly absorbed by the unconscious mind, seem to be a primary driving force in dream states. I quote to you the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud. That the dream has at its disposal recollections which are inaccessible to the waking state is such a remarkable and theoretically important fact that I should like to urge more attention to. End quote. Now, the extent to which childhood recollections affect dream states is to be given notice, but so should the fact that many dreams show element of more recent times. Now, the said recent impressions must, however, be given time to be weak and remote. Freud explores some claims in which intense impressions to the waking mind, such as the loss of a loved one, appear in dreams only after being ignored to some extent by the waking mind. A peculiarity in the selection of memory in dream states is the emphasis laid on both significant and superficial reminiscences. The preference of dream on the most insignificant and unnoticed detail is what can lead individuals to the assumptions that dreams and wakeful states are not at all connected or in any way relate. But after research, Freud comes to understand from this behavior of memory in dream that nothing in which we have once psychically possessed is ever entirely lost. This is a significant theory, not only on the topic of psychology, but on the topic of memory. I quote to you the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud. Every impression, even the most insignificant, leaves a trace unalterable, indefinitely capable of appearing in the light of day. End quote. Now, let's explore what exactly causes dreams. Where do they come from and what causes them? And we will explore this in much more detail later, but let's just brush over it. Now, are dreams of psychological or physiological stimuli? Freud identifies four main forms of dream sources: external stimuli, external sensory stimuli, internal sensory stimuli, internal physical excitations, and purely psychical exciting sources. External sensory stimuli is basically the, the impressions picked up by the mind, by the senses during sleep. See, in the endeavor to fall asleep, humans shut off sensory paths from the outer world, though not completely. The mind remains in constant communication with the material world even during sleep. The sensory stimuli which reach us may easily become the source of dreams. And there are a good deal of examples. Sensation of cold due to exposed body parts or changes in producing sensations to touch could result in a number of dreams. Internal sensory stimuli basically refers to the subjective changes of internal senses, changes such as the widening or narrowing of the aperture of the retina, changes in the rate of blood flow, or changes in pressure of the ear. And these can cause a number of different dream states. There are also internal physical excitations. These are organic excitations. They could result from diseases or particular levels of hormones in particular regions of the body. And these excitations could result in a number of dreams. Sexual excitations are a very good example. Now, lastly, we have psychically exciting sources. Now, since daily interests have been identified as being psychic sources, they aren't necessarily far-reaching enough, as there are instances of dreams relating to such that only appear after such stimuli have lost potential. There is a possibility that dreams have an aspect of spontaneity in the manifestation produced, but nevertheless, other psychic dream sources up to now are unknown. Now, let's explore Freud's exploration of the psychological peculiarities of dreams. Now, dreams differ from waking thought in a number of ways. Unlike waking thoughts, dreams don't tend to follow any strict logic structure. Contradictions simply exist, impossibilities are the order of the day, and everything just blends together without resistance. Intense visual imagination tends to be prioritized over abstract ideas or concepts, which forms a very core thesis in Freud's dream theory. The intense psychological peculiarities of the dreams are something we will explore to in much depth a little bit later. Now, let's go to the method of dream interpretation. Now, Freud rejected the idea that symbols in dreams have universal meanings. Instead, he asked the dreamer to engage in free association, letting the mind wander without censorship. The goal was to trace every element of the dream back to its origin in waking life. Even seemingly random connections might lead to hidden, repressed desires. Free association forces the ego to lower its defenses, allowing unconscious thoughts to emerge. One of Freud's most controversial claims was that all dreams are wish fulfillments, even if they seem unpleasant. The unconscious mind expresses forbidden desires through dreams, but in disguised forms. Even nightmares can contain repressed wishes, twisted through dreamwork mechanisms, which we shall explore later. A good example would be a man who dreams that his boss is humiliating him in front of his colleagues. At first glance, this seems like a bad dream, not a wish. But through free association, he realizes that he secretly resents his boss, and he wishes that his boss would expose his own flaws in public. His dream is fulfilling an unconscious need by reversing it, putting the dreamer in the humiliating position instead. Now, wishes aren't always obvious. They're sometimes masked by the unconscious mind so that they seem more acceptable. Now, Freud argued that dreams always have two levels of meaning. We have manifest content and latent content. Now, manifest content is the dream as you remember it upon awakening. It's often bizarre, fragmented, and illogical. Latent content is the hidden unconscious meaning behind the dream. This is where the true message of the dream is buried. Dream interpretation is about decoding the latent content by looking at the associations behind the manifest content. A good example is a woman dreams that she's running late for an important event. The manifest content is she's stressed, rushing, and unable to reach her destination. But after free association, the latent content is uncovered. The event represents life goals, and the feeling of lateness reflects her anxieties about failure and time slipping away. Let's brush over the idea of dream work. The dream work is the process that distorts or disguises dreams, distorts and disguises unconscious desires, making them appear as bizarre symbolic forms. Freud identified four main techniques the mind uses in transformation, which is one is condensation. The mind taking different emotional states or ideas and blending them into one image. There is displacement, which is hiding the true emotion behind something un remotely neutral, remotely unimpressive. We have symbolization, which is when abstract ideas become images, when the idea of anger becomes something like a lion. And then we have secondary revision, which is the conscious mind trying to make, and this often happens, it's a defense mechanism. It's something that we don't tend to notice happening because in the dream, it is often bizarre, but after we wake up, for some reason, there's a logical order to it, which is the conscious mind trying to give it logical structure. That is secondary revision. We'll explore dream work in much more detail. Freud didn't just propose his theory, but he actually used it in real therapy to uncover unconscious conflicts. As a case study, Freud describes one of his dreams where he sees a botanical monograph. Now, the manifest content is it's just a book about plants, but the latent content after he undergoes physical free association is that he had recently been criticized about his work, and he recalled a student who failed in an exam on botany. So he unconsciously connected his fear of failure to the image of a botanical book. And the dream was a way of expressing and processing this anxiety. Freud emphasizes that not all wishes are acceptable to the unconscious mind. Many are repressed because they conflict with social norms or personal morality. They therefore sneak into dreams in symbolic and disguised forms. Dream analysis helps uncover them, bringing repressed conflicts onto the surface. A person who grew up in a religiously strict household, for example, would dream of climbing a would might repress sexual desires, and he might in turn dream of climbing a steep mountain, is which is a symbol for struggle and sexual desire. Now, why exactly do dreams matter in psychoanalysis, especially to Freud? See, Freud saw dreams as the most direct access to the subconscious. By interpreting them, we can reveal unresolved conflicts from childhood, understand true desires and fears, and break through repression and achieve self awareness. Dream analysis became one of Freud's most important therapeutic tools, helping patients explore their minds beyond what they could consciously admit. Let us explore Freud's idea of the dream as the fulfillment of a wish, another very controversial claim. I quote to you the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud. All dreams, no matter how strange or unpleasant, are disguised expressions of wishes that the dreamer wants fulfilled. End quote. Freud argues that the mind disguises wishes in ways that makes them unrecognizable. He challenges the common view that dreams are meaningless and purely random. Instead, he claims that dreams are psychic events shaped by real desires in the unconscious mind. They're expressions of wishes often unacceptable to our waking selves. The mind disguises these wishes using dreamwork mechanisms. Now, Freud supports this claim with experiments on children and adults. Now, the dream of a child he describes a little girl who dreams of eating strawberries and cherries. The day before, she had seen these fruits but wasn't allowed to eat them. That night, she dreams that she is eating them freely. This is a very pure example of wish fulfillment. The dream directly satisfies her unfulfilled desire. Freud notes that children's dreams are often simple because their desires haven't been completely repressed yet. But what about adults? Now, here's where things get a bit more complex. Unlike children, adult dreams are rarely so direct. We repress many of our desires because they are socially unacceptable. If these desires appeared so obviously in dreams, they would disturb us. Instead, the mind distorts them, hiding them under symbolism, displacement, and condensation. Freud describes a dream where he sees a friend who he doesn't like. At first glance, the dream doesn't seem like a wish at all, but through free association, Freud realizes he had wished this friend would fail at something. Instead of dreaming directly about the failure, which could trigger guilt, he dreams of simply seeing the friend, allowing the wish to be fulfilled in a disguised way. This proves his assertion: the unconscious mind doesn't care about morality, it just wants to express desires. This is why Freud insists that even nightmares are wish fulfillments. Now, if dreams supposedly fulfill wishes, why do we have the said nightmares? Now, says that the unconscious tries to fulfill a wish, but other parts of the mind resist it, resulting in a compromise. The wish appears, but in a distorted, sometimes horrifying way. He gives an example of a person dreaming of a loved one that has died. At first glance, it seems like a nightmare. It's horrible. A loved one has perished. But after free association, The said person could realize that he or she harbors resentment or frustration towards this said loved one. Freud argues that these true desires don't mean we actually want harm to come to the other person, only that the mind needs an outlet for its unconscious conflicts. Why do wishes need to be disguised? Some desires are shameful or aggressive or taboo. And that's so much so that they can't be experienced directly. They can't be expressed directly. We therefore repress them. But repression doesn't necessarily suffice because desires still find a way to express themselves. And dreams are one such an outlet. Instead of dreaming exactly what we wish, we dream something distorted that hides the real desire. The stronger the repression, the more twisted and bizarre the dream. Now, to prove this theory, Freud analyzes one of his own dreams in extreme detail. He dreams of Irma, a patient whose treatment hasn't gone well. In the dream, he examines her and sees a white spot on her throat. A doctor gives her an injection with a dirty syringe. The other doctors seem unconcerned. Through free association, Freud realizes that he felt guilty about Irma's unsuccessful treatment. But deep down, he wished to shift the blame to someone else. The dream twists this into the image of another doctor being careless, fulfilling the hidden wish that Freud was not responsible for her condition. Let's explore this distortion in dreams to a bit more detail. Why do dreams tend to appear bizarre and senseless? I quote the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud. Dreams are distorted because the mind senses unacceptable desires, disguising them so that they can slip past reason. End quote. Freud begins by addressing an obvious question. If dreams fulfill wishes, why don't they just present those wishes openly? The conscious mind, which Freud terms the ego, and social morality, which he terms the superego, repress unacceptable desire, often sexual, aggressive, or socially inappropriate. But since the unconscious mind wishes to express these desires anyway, the mind disguises them so that they may slip past internal censorship. And they do this through the methods of dream distortion or the methods of dream work: condensation, displacement, symbolism, and secondary revision. Freud emphasizes that dreams are not just random distortions, but a compromise between expression and repression. He gives an example of a woman in therapy who dreams of suffering public humiliation from her doctor. At first glance, this is, of course, a nightmare. But Freud argues that deep down, she actually desired to be emotionally close to the doctor. Since, to her, this desire is unacceptable, the dream disguises it as a humiliation. This shows that distortion isn't accidental. It allows taboo desires to be expressed safely. Freud goes further to argue that to make an important distinction. Normal dreams distort content just enough to bypass repression, but neurotic dreams are heavily distorted because the conflict between desire and repression is much, much stronger. He suggests that analyzing dream distortion can reveal the depth of a person's psychological conflict. Now, Freud argues that the same mechanisms for distortion in dreams can also apply to neurotic symptoms such as phobias and compulsions, and Freudian slips, which are errors in speech that reveal unconscious thoughts. He therefore claims that understanding dream distortions can help treat psychological disorders. A very, very major claim. Let us explore to much more depth the material and sources of the dream. Where do dreams get their content from? Now, Freud argues that dreams aren't just random. Instead, they come from specific sources, mainly sensory stimuli, internal and external, recent experiences, which he calls day residue, and repressed thoughts and memories, which are unconscious material. Freud starts with something obvious. Dreams can be influenced by physical sensations that occur during sleep. A person hears thunder while sleeping and dreams of a battlefield. Or a ticking clock turns into a dream of a blacksmith hammering metal. This shows that the brain integrates real sensory input into dreams, often in symbolic ways. But this is not enough to explain most dreams. The body itself also provides dream material through internal stimuli like hunger and thirst, muscle tension and pain, or internal organic sensations. A good example would be a person who's sexually excited dreaming of a sexually exciting dream, or a person who has a full bladder dreaming of constantly looking for a toilet, or a person with a stomachache dreaming of being stabbed. These stimuli don't create exact dreams, but they shape them symbolically. Freud also suggested that most dreams contain fragments of recent experiences, which he calls day residue. During the day, we experience thousands of thoughts, emotions, and stimuli. Most of these get processed and stored in memories. Others linger in the unconscious and resurface in dreams. Freud noticed that dreams often take material form from the last 24 to 48 hours. An example would be of a woman watching a documentary on volcanoes and dreaming that night that her house is exploding in flames and she's trapped inside. And finally, Freud goes on to argue that some dreams don't just come from external or recent experiences. Instead, they bring back forgotten, repressed, and long buried memories. He claims that dreams can revive childhood memories, long buried childhood memories, which have been consciously forgotten. Dreams also allow repressed desires to emerge disguised through symbols. A person dreaming of being locked in a house could symbolize a repressed memory of a childhood rejection. Now, seldom do dreams come from a single source. Instead, the sources combine. This is why dreams often feel chaotic. They're a patchwork of different sources fused together. Now, let's explore dream work to much more depth. Freud argues that the raw content of dreams, thought, memories, wishes, go through psychological transformations before appearing as a dream. The disguising process happens through four main mechanisms. The first is condensation, the second displacement, the third symbolism, and the last secondary revision. Condensation is when multiple thoughts, memories, or emotions are fused into a single dream image. An example is a man dreaming of his childhood home, but the house has features from his high school and workplace. This dream is condensing different locations into one symbolic space, allowing the unconscious to express multiple ideas without making them obvious. Another example is a woman who dreams of a person who looks like her father but has the voice of her ex boyfriend. Her mind combines two figures into one, hinting at an emotional connection between them. Displacement occurs when the true meaning of the dream is shifted to something less important or unrelated, an emotionally charged idea transferred to something neutral. A person who feels guilty about cheating a person who feels guilty about cheating in a relationship dreams of having lost his or her wallet. The wallet probably symbolizes something deeper, perhaps the loss of trust. Dreams take unacceptable or unbearable thoughts and displace them to less threatening symbols. Freud believed that many common dream symbols represent deeper unconscious thoughts. Some examples are houses, which represent the body, traveling, which represents life's journey, or climbing stairs, which represents sexual activity. Now, bear in mind that these symbols aren't universal, they're simply examples. The symbols themselves depend very much on the dreamer's personal experiences and unconscious associations. Lastly, we have secondary revision. Freud noticed that even though dreams are chaotic, they often have some kind of structure or story. This happens because the brain tries to impose logical order on them when we wake up. A dream might originally just be scattered images, but when we recall it after we wake, we might remember it as a complete narrative. This is because the mind fills in the gaps and organizes dream fragments in a more structured way. This makes dreams less bizarre than they actually are, but makes them much harder to interpret because of the alterations by the conscious mind. Finally, we're going to explore Freud's grand thesis, which will tie together all the previous concepts into a comprehensive model of how the dream functions psychologically. Freud explains on the relationship between the unconscious Freud expands, sorry, on the relationships between the conscious and the unconscious, the forces shaping dream content, and what this means for our waking lives. First is the forgetting of dreams. Freud argues that forgetting isn't necessarily accidental, but a form of resistance. The unconscious produces dreams, but the conscious ego often rejects them or senses them upon awakening. This ties to his earlier ideas about dream distortion. If dreams express forbidden desires, it makes sense that the ego would push them away. Forgetting is therefore a psychological defense mechanism to maintain mental stability. Dreams, next, we will explore how dreams use visual and emotional languages rather than rational verbal thought. You see, a person with an unresolved childhood fear of abandonment might dream of being lost in a vast desert. The dream represents pictorial, symbolic representations of an unconscious fear, not necessarily straightforward verbal thoughts. Freud reiterates on the fact that dreams expose hidden layers of the mind. The unconscious is constantly pushing desires to the consciousness, but censorship forces them to take disguised form. This implies that the unconscious is not separate from the conscious mind, but always at work beneath it, shaping thought, behavior, and waking reality. This is why Freud saw dreams as a crucial diagnostic tool. They reveal what impression tries to hide, what repression tries to hide. Freud then introduces two modes of thinking: primary process thinking, which is unconscious logic. It is dreamlike, emotional, and non-linear, operating on associations, emotions, and symbols. Then we have secondary process thinking, which is rational logic. It's based on logic, it's based on sequence and structure, rational structure. Dreams, then, reveal how the unconscious mind truly operates through symbolism, emotional resonance, and irrational connections rather than any structured reasoning. Let's close by revisiting Freud's Freud's core thesis. Dreams fulfill wishes, but they do much more. They're a form of psychological release, allowing repressed tensions to surface easily. They are a way to solve internal conflicts by masking them in symbolism, and are, most importantly, a window into the unconscious, offering insights into the fundamental drives shaping our waking reality. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Freud's dream theory in a nutshell. If you enjoyed this video and this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.